8 days, that's all it took. 8 days after one vote, Burkina Faso cut every diplomatic tie with France. Look, I'm not saying Burkina Faso reduced diplomatic ties or suspended diplomatic ties with France. They cut it completely. Which of course raises one uncomfortable question. What kind of vote can make an entire country walk away from its former colonial power? It happened inside the European Parliament. A French general walked to the microphone. He wasn't there to discuss Europe. He was there to convince 720 lawmakers that Burkina Faso was collapsing. He told them that Burkina Faso had already lost more than 50% of its territory to the Tero people. They voted. 476 said yes. Only 11 said no. 8 days later, Burkina Faso severed all diplomatic ties with France. Now, most people stopped there. But that's where the real story begins. You see, the real story is what is under that voted resolution. Who wrote it? Why now? I want you to stay with me to the end of this video, and by the end of this video, you are going to see something that most channels missed completely. Let me start by telling you something about the man who led the march. His name is Christophe Gomat. Most headlines called him a French member of parliament. You see, that title is doing a lot of hiding. Gomat spent his career inside France's military intelligence. He has been head of the DRM, Direction du Renseignement Militaire, as they said it in French. He didn't stumble onto Sahel policy. He spent decades building it. So when he stood in that parliament and told 476 members of parliament that Burkina Faso was collapsing, that Russia was taking over, that the military leadership in Burkina Faso was collapsing, he wasn't reading someone else's briefing. He was the briefing. He told the European Parliament that Burkina Faso had lost over 50% of its territory. Burkina's government fired back, saying they control over 70% of the country's territory. These two were talking about the same country, the same moment. So who is lying? Here is what I will say. Gomat is a former intelligence chief presenting numbers to a parliament he wants to persuade. He picked the most alarming reading from the data. That is what that job trained you to do. But Burkina Faso's numbers isn't just government PR line. The population, and this matters, is largely behind Traoré. Protests in Ouagadougou have been in support of the military leadership, not against it. People are singing in the streets. Volunteers are willingly joining the VDP. There is a real sense on the ground that this government is fighting for them in ways that previous governments didn't. That doesn't mean the security situation is fine. It clearly isn't, as it is seen in some areas in the northern part of the country. But a government that had actually lost the country would not have that kind of street energy behind it. The point is, a former French military intelligence chief built a case in the parliament against a country that had just expelled France. And I want you to keep that image in mind. We are going to need it later. Now, what was actually inside this resolution that was voted in the EU Parliament? Arbitrary detentions, media crackdowns, shrinking political space, and forced military conscription. Citizens pressured into joining the VDP, the Volunteers of the Defense of the Fatherland. You see, those are real concerns worth raising. But there is something that caught my eye. Around the same time, videos were circulating of Ukrainian men being grabbed off the street, pulled from markets, loaded into vehicles for forced deployment to the front. Towns in Ukraine went on strike over it. Did the EU Parliament vote a resolution over that? I went looking, couldn't find one. And there is a media layer too. The resolution condemns Burkina for banning foreign outlets. TV 5 Monde, France 24, RFI, BBC, VOA. Burkina Faso says they were destabilizing the country by platforming terror activity. Fine. In 2022, the EU banned Sputnik and RT entirely. We are not talking about suspension for a particular period. Banned for spreading disinformation about Ukraine. So when Europe bans Russian state media, it is defended as national security. It is seen as legitimate. But when Burkina Faso bans French state media, it is seen as press freedom crisis, parliamentary resolution. I'm just saying, both bans are bad for press freedom. I genuinely believe that. But the EU cannot put media bans on a resolution against Burkina Faso without being honest about what it did in its own house. You see, I've been following analysis on these resolutions from the EU Parliament, and most people skip this particular layer. Where did Burkina's crisis actually came from? 2011, NATO intervenes in Libya. Gaddafi falls, the country collapses, and hundreds of thousands of weapons from Gaddafi's enormous stockpiles start flowing south into the Sahel. Burkina Faso's government has said officially, and this is documented in African Union reports and Western security analysis, that the Sahel crisis is a direct consequence of that intervention. And now, the same Western bloc that ran that operation is voting resolutions about the human rights situation in countries living with the aftermath. You see, there is more. By 2026, Al Jazeera was reporting that armed groups in the Sahel had moved to modified commercial drones, surveillance, precision attacks, coordinated tactics. The Institute of Security Studies confirmed it. This isn't just wishful talking. The tactics show real technical training, the kind that takes money and instructions. Russian officials, specifically Maria Zakharova, publicly claimed there is evidence of Ukrainian involvement in arming Sahel groups. That claim, however, comes from Russian government, contested. Western sources dispute it, which means I can't independently verify it. But analysts note the drone tactics resemble techniques from the Ukrainian theater, and that particular observation is from the security research community. So the question I would love to hear in the European Parliament, if this resolution is genuinely about protecting Burkinabe civilians, where is the equal energy investigating who armed the people unaliving those civilians? I went looking for that resolution too. I couldn't find it. Now I want to say something that most channels are leaving out. Burkina Faso has real challenges that nobody is pretending doesn't exist. There are reports of civilian casualties in anti-insurgency operations. And honestly, that's a hard conversation. But here is the point. The Sahel is not a conventional war. Tiro don't wear uniforms. They live inside communities. They move inside civilians deliberately. The playbook that works in a clean battlefield doesn't apply here. You see, Africa may need to develop its own framework for what governance and security look like in this kind of conflict. Not a copy of what Europe does, not a rubber stamp from Geneva. Something that actually fits the terrain, the culture, and the threat. You see, what I've just said is not a defense of abuse, but a recognition that the rules that have been used to judge Burkina Faso were written for a different kind of war by people who have never had to fight this one. And what Burkina is saying loudly is, we won't take lessons from people whose policies help create the fire we are trying to fight. That's a sovereign position. Reasonable people disagree, but you have to understand it to disagree with it, honestly. And there is more detail that tells you how the rest of the world is reading all this. While Brussels was voting and Paris was talking about reciprocal measures, Ibrahim Traoré received 8 new ambassadors in Ouagadougou. While being isolated, the isolation narrative is mostly for European domestic consumption. Okay, here is another layer underneath all of this. There's another general, a French general. I'm not talking about General Gomans that we talked earlier. This one is the former chief of the French army called General Lecointre. Burkina Faso's government cites him specifically in official communications. He reportedly suggested that Europe should one day return to the Sahel. Return to the Sahel. Now, put that next to painting Burkina Faso as repressive, as failing as a Russian-infiltrated state losing territory to the Terro. Put it next to a former military intelligence chief delivering that picture in parliament. Put it next to a separate AU resolution same year calling for unconditional release of Niger's removed President Mohamed Bazoum. Burkina Faso's government, and specifically Traoré, looked at all of that and said this is not about human rights. This is about a country looking for a way to come back to Burkina Faso. Okay, whether you think they are right or paranoid, that belief drove the announcement on June 26. It drove Mali giving French diplomats 72 hours to leave. Equatorial Guinea threatening the same. The whole domino running the same logic. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, they formed the alliance of Sahel states, left ECOWAS, we all know that, issued their own passports, built a joint military force, and released an official statement saying, and I quote, "No governance lessons to receive from the West." The music changed. Okay, let me tell you what I think this actually means. Burkina Faso is building record cement prices by 50% to speed up construction, infrastructure plans, development drives. You see, the government argument is that access to water, electricity, roads, housing is a human right, and that Western institutions only ever count the civil political kind. You see, you can disagree with the priorities, but the framing is deliberate. The AES is betting that Russia, Turkey, and BRICS partners can replace what France and the EU provided. Maybe that bet pays off, maybe it doesn't. The security situation is still dangerous. The governance problems are real. But there is something for sure about Africa's relationship with the world going forward. The countries doing well are the ones who know what they have, know what they want, and are willing to say no to deals that doesn't serve them. Burkina Faso is trying to establish that posture. The methods are messy, the timing is rough, but the underlying claim, we choose our partners, that is not going away. Now, let me leave you with something I keep coming back to. Basoma Bazi, senior Burkinabe official, said recently that the Burkinabe people are asking for nothing more than what free people have always been asking for. The right to choose your own partners and your own development model. That is it. Not the radical demand, not the revolutionary manifesto. Just let us decide. You see, the chess game here, inside all this geopolitics between Burkina Faso and France, is nowhere near finished. France is talking about reciprocal measures. The EU has more tools. Russia is a selfless partner. The security situation in Burkina Faso is real and it's dangerous. But the June 18 resolution that was built to pressure, to isolate, to delegitimize, seems to have done the opposite. It pushed Burkina Faso to make a move that weeks before would have seemed unthinkable. And I want to ask you something before you go. If Africa is going to build real partnerships with the world on its own terms, what does that actually look like? What has to be in place? And who gets to define what a fair deal is? The Sahel right now is the most intense place. That question is being answered. And how it gets answered is going to matter for every country on this continent. Drop your thoughts below. I'm Asamoah Elvis. You're watching Africa Today, and this is a Strategic Lens. See you in my next video.